Make sure your insurance doesn't come up short. Get gap cover with ALA. For more information, follow the links in the description.
Morning.
How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad.
Hello everybody. Today, another installment in my mini-series attempting to drive every single one of the modern day Porsche GT products. And in this video, we're completing an important milestone. Because, with the exception of the now new 992.2 GT3, having driven this, I will have sampled every single one of the base model GT3s from the 996.1 to the 992.1. And this, the 997.2, stands out for a few reasons. First off, this generation of GT3 was the final outing of the legendary Mezger engine. But, and perhaps because of that, this generation of car also appears to be on paper the poorest value for money of all. So, is it? Or is there really a magic to this car that means it's worth paying a bit more for? Find out in today's episode of JayEmm on Cars. As you would expect of anything with the GT3 badge on the back, this car follows the same formula laid down by the original 996 at the end of the 1990s, which has been followed to this very day. So take one 911, here the 997.2 generation, strip out a little bit of weight, add a little bit of aero, make it more track focused, give it a nice fighty engine, and call it a day. And one thing that really struck me while doing the research for this car is just how little, in some ways, the car has changed over the decades. So here, for the 997.2, you had a now 3.8 litre version of the Mezger engine, which formerly had been a 3.6 for both 996 and 997.1. And where in its last outing this engine made 415 horsepower, here it's now made 435. With 317 pounds-feet of torque, that's 430 newton meters. Good enough for a top speed of 194 mile an hour and a 0 to 62 dash somewhere in the 4s. And for the day, those were pretty good numbers. Of course, if you wanted more, you'd go and buy a 911 Turbo or, the top of the tree, the GT2. However, if you were to compare this with the Ferrari of the day, then the 430 Scuderia, that made 510 horsepower. And this car's modern-day successor only makes just about the same power as that Ferrari did a decade and a half ago, some 525 horsepower, the previous generation being just over 500. All of it still coming courtesy of a naturally aspirated flat 6. The Ferrari, meanwhile, its modern-day successor, has a 3-litre twin-turbo V6 and hybrid system, giving you some 880 horsepower. Absolutely incredible. Thing is, though, on a road like this, there are those out there who'd say you don't need any more than the 997 already has. Is that true? Well, let's hit the sport button, open the valves in this Brook Race exhaust, and find out. Got to be said, they're right, because with that classic long Porsche gearing, here on this road, with a limit of 60, you can already get yourself into trouble in a second. And of course, this being a GT3, so much of the experience is all about that engine. And as it happens, this car's owner Sam didn't go looking for a GT3 at all. In his youth, he had a series of hot hatches. He then moved to London, where naturally he didn't really find the opportunity or the roads to enjoy his cars, and so didn't give up on it, but instead parked it for a little bit. A decade later, business had done well, and he decided he wanted to treat himself to something. Having been a big fan of the 997 from its inception, it was the car he wanted. And initially, he went looking at simply a 997 C2. Because in his mind, and rightly so, that was all the car he needed. However, speaking to a couple of friends in the know, they persuaded him to up his budget a little bit and to go for something properly special. And that's how he wound up with this. Now look, I get it. I am one of those people that'll be quick to point out that the later DFI engine, as you found in the 991 GT3 and onwards, is still a marvellous thing. But every time I drive one of these Mezger cars, I am reminded of just why people fell for it so much. It certainly has what you might call a bit more character. It's a very guttural affair, particularly with this exhaust, which I'm going to turn off for now. Though, much like its successor, you can tell that it does all of its best work in the higher reaches of the rev range. And it's not to say that at 3000 RPM it doesn't have anything, because that's not true. You really want to get it spinning beyond at least 4, and then if you want the best from it, 5 and above. Now, somewhat frustratingly, I did recently get to drive this car's predecessor, the 997.1, which came with the 3.6 variant of the engine. Unfortunately, the precise car that I drove had actually had a bit of a transplant, so it had the same engine as this in it. Therefore, I am unable to tell you just how much better or not this is compared to that. I also drove that car on entirely different roads and in different conditions. So as for a comparison, I'm going to try and avoid to make too much of one. However, even in isolation, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this car. First off, and most important for any 911, the steering. Here, I would say it doesn't feel quite as light as that in the 997.1, but nor does it feel anywhere near as tied down as in the 996.2, which thus far has really stood out, I think, as a high point in terms of chassis for the GT3. Yes, with every successive generation the car has become ever more capable, but I think along the way, on occasion, it's lost a little bit of interactivity. With the aero becoming ever more serious on them, other concerns do start to get raised as well. Practical ones. Boring, I know, but if you are someone like Sam that wants to live in the city and still enjoy a car like this, you will be very thankful for things like the front lift, here making its debut. Even so, I am perpetually terrified that along here I am going to find something to scrape that little front lip on. Granted, it's a somewhat sacrificial element, but still, I do not like the sound of car on floor. This little bit here probably doesn't look like anything to you, but it's nasty. Alright, let's go. Oh yeah, 4,000 RPM, there's a step change there. So much of one, in fact, that the back end of the car nearly tried to get out on me. Oh, so sweet, this thing. Once you got up to speed, the suspension starts to make a lot more sense too. At town speeds, it's really quite unpleasant, to the point that I'd really question whether I'd actually want to daily something like this. And I do very often think about buying myself a GT3. As a petrol head and someone that loves their Porsches, it feels like a real omission for me not to have ever had one. The problem is though, they just don't feel like particularly good value. And we'll get back to that in a little bit. For now though, I want to talk a bit more about this steering, because it has to be said, it is rather nice. Very classic 911. The whole thing is weighted on that rear axle, leaving the front very light, and you've got to drive around that. If you're unaware of it, if you're unwilling to deal with it, this is a car in which you're not going to have a very good time. But if you know what it is, if you know how to deal with it, and you know how to work with it, oh, it's a lot of fun. As for modifications, this car is standard barring 2 alterations, one being the aforementioned Brook Race exhaust, and the other being an updated Porsche communication system down here, which I gotta say, I give Porsche real credit for doing that, because it does make these just that little bit more usable. The screen's a little bit lower res than you'd expect, but it has all the modern functionality you'd want, CarPlay, Android Auto, etc, etc, and it means if you want to drive and use this, take it across Europe, you can do so easily. And that's exactly what Sam has done. Keen to make sure this is a car that he not just owns, but enjoys, in the time he's had it, just under a year, he's put 5,000 miles on it, including recently a trip across the Route Napoleon. Very good. I tell you something though, it speaks real volumes about this car that, though it has an incredible engine in the back, it's the chassis which is really the star here. And maybe not necessarily for the reason you would think. Yeah, it's a bit stiffer than you'd like on the road. It's got PASM, Porsche Adaptive Suspension, as standard, but even so, it's a very firm thing, and your only options here are stiff or rock hard. Yeah, put it into sport and it feels like there's virtually no suspension at all. However, it is that classic 911 weight bias, which here you can feel so transparently, which makes it a really magical thing. It reminds you at all points in time that that front end doesn't quite have the grip you might expect, or would get from something like, say, I don't know, a Ferrari, or maybe even something like an RS6. And whilst on the one hand that will certainly temper your speed, on the road, that I think is a very good thing. It means that you're constantly thinking about what the whole car is doing, and you've got this brilliant dialogue with it and the road. The modern day 992 generation, they feel so incredibly tied down. I would say with some confidence I could go through any corner in one of those at least 25 to 30% quicker than in this, maybe more, but I wouldn't be having more fun. Gearbox, let's talk about that. Here you can have only one, a 6-speed manual, and it's actually very good indeed. The ratios are a little overly long, a common complaint of just about every Porsche of the era. However, the action is beautiful. Very short throw, almost no play in it, and I know it's a cliche, but it does have that kind of rifle bolt feel to it. And it would appear the car has some fans. The local constabulary are joining me for my drive. So, as a driving experience, the 997.2 GT3, it's pretty darn good. More or less everything you'd want from an old school 911. Interactive, enjoyable, makes a fantastic noise, and I suppose thanks to the front lift, a touch more livable than some of the cars that came before. It's also a pretty good looking thing, and if you're trying to work out how to differentiate this from the 997.1, the differences are subtle. The easiest way is to look at the back, where you'll find here the same nice LED lights as you get on the regular 997.2 and a little vent just below the GT3 badging. As was also GT3 tradition by this point, you could also get the car either as the Club Sport, as we have it here, with cage in the back, bucket seats, and often a fire extinguisher, or the comfort specification. Typically the less desirable one now, but also the slightly more usable, with comfier seats, no cage in the back, though still no seats. That didn't come in as an option until much, much later. The clutch pedal is a little on the heavy side, the brake pedal not so much, but both can be modulated with absolute precision and are a delight. Around town, again, I think the clutch in particular would get a little bit tiring, but this is a GT3 after all. That sort of thing I can forgive. Okie dokie. Let's have a chat. Morning.
How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you.
Quick little chat with the local constabulary there. Turns out one of them is actually a follower of the channel. I actually said to the owner of the car, Sam, earlier that when I do my filming, I just assume that at some point a copper is going to be watching. They were just making sure that nobody was here to do something silly. Like me, they are just out here to do a job, and they want to make sure that everybody is safe. Can't say fairer than that. Back to the car. It's a lovely thing. on the face of it, does everything right. But what's the problem then? Why did I say that on paper this appears to be maybe the most nonsensical of all GT3s? Well, it won't surprise you to hear, but that's got everything to do with the price. You see, one of these today could command anywhere from £90,000 to £120,000. The GT3 also has become something that is very mileage sensitive, almost as much so, I would say, as an equivalent Ferrari. And what makes this particularly frustrating is that for stuff like the 997, many of them were bought and driven in an era when people didn't really mind that sort of thing. So they do have miles on. And those that understand them and know them will tell you it's the ones that have been driven are often the best. And let's just call this, for argument's sake, a £100,000 car. It's a lot of money, isn't it? Particularly for something that in here doesn't really feel any different to a 987 Boxster. In fact, I've spent the last 2 weeks inside my buddy Chris's 987, which has a full extended leather Cocoa interior. This one at least has a bit of leather on the dash, but Sam pointed out that many of them don't, and so they can actually feel quite cheap inside. And there is, I think, a balance to be struck between the nice stripped out lightweight racer feel and something that does feel like you've spent big money on it. And of course, in their day, these didn't command quite the same premium as a GT3 does now, but it is an area where I think Porsche never really did quite enough. You sit in a GT3 and you are just sat in a 911, and for this money you could have, granted, it would be bottom of the market, a Ferrari 458. You could also have your choice of Audi R8s, and that's to say nothing of a whole bunch of other interesting stuff out there from other manufacturers. I mean, heck, you could have an entire collection of BMW M3s for this money. But look within just the Porsche world itself, and you could have a 981 or 718 Cayman GT4. I don't think it's going to be very long until the GT4 RS is this kind of money. I suspect maybe a few are already close to that kind of £115,000, £120,000 that represents the top end of these. And let's ignore for a moment, shall we, the RS and of course the mighty RS 4.0, the ultimate iteration of the road-going Mezger engine. They today command absolutely baffling sums. But if for whatever reason you weren't specifically after a 997.2, well, if you want a pretty 911 GT3, the 996 can be had for a bit less, though sadly nowhere near as much less as used to be the case. If you then want something a bit faster, and I think also potentially even prettier, you could get a 991 GT3, either the .1 or potentially, if you have to have a manual, the .2. And Sam was saying he is thinking about maybe making a 991.2 with a manual his next port of call, because you can now pick up one of those with miles on for again between £110,000 and £120,000. After a little bit of a blip where the market went mad for manuals, apparently it has corrected itself and then some, and today the manuals actually command less than a PDK. Those are also a little bit newer, will have a warranty, and yes, I know they have their engine issues surrounding them, but while you've got a warranty, you're probably not going to worry too much. And they are certainly a big step on. So if you do want a car that you can take on track, that is going to give you quite a bit more performance. After all, on paper, even the new GT3 RS doesn't even have another 100 horsepower on this. All of its extra time advantage comes courtesy of chassis and aero. So if I were to buy myself a 911 GT3, would it be one of these? I don't think so. I really enjoyed that 997.1, but of course it had the wrong engine in it. To date though, I think the cars I've enjoyed the most have been the first of the 991.1s, though I've yet to sample one with the new engine in it, and the 996.2. As a tool to interact with and enjoy a piece of road, thus far, that has been my absolute favourite. And so, if you'd like to help me continue my journey of discovery and make some more Porsche content, and you've got preferably a GT3 RS, or maybe an interesting turbo, a GT2, or indeed anything vaguely Porsche-shaped, please get in touch. In fact, it might sound daft, I know, but one car I'm really desperate to revisit is the 928. About as different as you'd get from this, but it's kind of part of the reason why I want to try one. And so, with that, all that remains to be said is a big thank you to Sam for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.